Hello, welcome to our next lesson here. We're going to first start off talking about organizational disobedience. So, organizational disobedience is the protest of or refusal to follow an organizational policy or action. So, this is somewhat similar to civil disobedience. So, we have still the word disobedience involved in both of these terms here, except for our present interest in regards to engineering ethics, we have organizational disobedience, disobedience in regards to an organizational policy, or it also could be disobedience in regards to the wishes of management as well. So in regards to organizational disobedience, the employer may not intend to do anything morally wrong. So it's not necessarily the case that organizational disobedience occurs in all cases where the employer kind of freely and openly makes an unethical decision, such as, let's say, using a material or okaying a project that leads to a bad product or a product that might be harmful. Sometimes, in some cases, the employer might not be aware that, for example, they're using poor materials, and then, let's say, an engineer might practice organizational disobedience and, let's say, refuse to work on the project as a form of kind of disobedience. And sometimes these situations can arise where the employer might not have full information and might not be aware that they've okayed something that is wrong. However, in a lot of cases, organizational disobedience and the practice of it does occur when management or those who are higher up know that they have made an unethical decision. Okay, so there are a variety of different kinds of disobedience. So we'll go through three of them. First one is disobedience by contrary action. So this is partaking in actions outside of work. So this is outside of work time when you're not punched in the clock, so to speak, but you're partaking in actions outside of work considered objectionable by management. It could be a lifestyle choice. It could be being a member of a certain kind of group or like a political organization. For example, being a member of an environmental group. One might be a member of an environmental group that is standing up against the very company that engineer works for. Maybe the company that the engineer in question works for is doing something that harms the environment. And outside of work, the engineer might be a member of this environmental group that is trying to stand up to that very same company. So in this situation, we can have this kind of situation where management doesn't want their employees to be members of this kind of group, environmental group that they're combating. But here we have a kind of form of disobedience by contrary action. Right? This engineer might be very environmentally conscious and may not like that their employer is doing things that are harming the environment, and so they're a member of this environmental group. So this can be seen as a form of disobedience, and generally speaking, as long as the employee is not harming others' rights, right? They're not violating other people's right to life, they're not torturing other people, things like that. As long as they're not doing that, they have the freedom to live their life as they please, to be members of relevant groups that aren't harming other people's rights. And they're free to be members of these kinds of groups and to live their life as they please without interference from one's employer. So here we have this kind of moral notion of liberty and freedom. Coming into play and how this carries weight and carries significant weight such that generally employers should not interfere with their employees' freedom outside of work. Okay, so our next kind of disobedience is disobedience by non-participation. And this is when engineers refuse to work on a project and they may even resign. They may refuse to work on a project by resigning, or they may ask to be moved to a different project, or maybe management just might move them to a different project because they might protest against a particular project. So historically, engineers, if they do practice disobedience by non-participation, they commonly do so in regards to issues when they learn that their work, for example, will be used in the military, where it can be used for killing. So this could run about just you have engineers who might be pacifists, who don't want to create products that end up being in some way used to indirectly or directly harm other human beings. Or you could have socially conscious engineers. At times, a country can partake in unjust wars, and that's definitely happened in US history as well. And so you can have engineers who may not want their product and what they're working on to be used in unjust wars that lead to killing. Also, commonly, engineers can participate in disobedience by non-participation, usually based on environmental concerns due to harming environment. So that's very common for engineers to practice disobedience by non-participation for that reason. And generally, when there's a legitimate request for non-participation based on conscience, moral conscience, or professional code, then employers generally should honor such requests. So the idea here is the importance of ethics, once again, in the workplace, in engineering, and for engineers to abide by high standards, right? To abide by high standards, and if it's based on legitimately moral reasons, right? They're not just trying to kind of say that they're doing it based on conscience, but they're really trying to get out of a project that they just find boring or that they just don't want to work for. So that's something that has to be looked out for. But as long as it's not based on that kind of devious move by an engineer, but it's legitimately based on conscience about ethics and at times adhering to the professional code of engineers, then employers generally should honor such requests. Okay, so let's move on to the next form of disobedience. And this is the one that a lot of people talk about and that you hear about in the news a lot. And this is disobedience by protest. And this is when the employer's actions are so objectionable that an engineer believes non-participation is insufficient. In other words, the act is so egregiously bad, so very bad, extremely bad, or harmful, or leads to extremely bad consequences, then an engineer believes not only should they not participate, right, but they believe they need to do something even more, such as partaking in active protest, or in other words, whistleblowing, blowing the whistle. And a whistleblower is an insider. So a whistleblower is someone who works in that very company in which this supposed highly unethical action is occurring. So a whistleblower is an insider, not an outsider of the company, but an insider who reveals information that the company does not want revealed to outsiders, such as to the press, to the public, to law enforcement agencies, to the government, etc. So you can have whistleblowers who reveal information, but they don't reveal information to outsiders. They might keep it in-house. This can be an internal case of whistleblowing. The alarm or the blowing the whistle stays inside the company. It's just that when these kinds of internal whistleblowers, they just kind of raise the objection or raise the concern in-house, such as to their supervisors or those who are higher up. So the idea with a whistleblower is that they reveal information not necessarily to outsiders, it's just that the information is such that the company does not want it to be revealed to outsiders. It still could be the case that it's not revealed to outsiders, but regardless, the information is so sensitive that the company does not want it to be revealed to outsiders. So as I said before, there is internal whistleblowing where it stays in-house. There's also external whistleblowing where the alarm goes outside the company. People like the press, the community, etc., are notified about it. There can also be this demarcation between anonymous as well as open forms of protest. So anonymous forms of whistleblowing is where the whistleblower is anonymous and their name is held anonymous. For example, a whistleblower might be able to blow the whistle through not revealing their name to the press, or for example, maybe in-house in an internal case, they submit their kind of objection through anonymous channels. You can also have a whistleblower case where it's an open case, and in open cases, the whistleblower's identity is revealed. All right, so these are just different ways to divide up whistleblowers and whistleblowing. All right, so next let's discuss justifications for whistleblowing. So what are some justifications for whistleblowing? So I invite you now to press pause and just kind of think. And you can think about various moral reasons there might be that can justify certain cases of whistleblowing, and you can even rely on ethical theories. Okay, so here are some reasons that justify whistleblowing, and these are not exhaustive. But one is kind of one of the most common ones is utilitarianism, to minimize harm. So usually whistleblowing occurs when the harms and potential harms to society and the community are very serious. So blowing the whistle can lead to maximizing the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So a utilitarianism justification can come in, and utilitarianism in most cases carries the greatest strength when there are lots of lives at risk in which they could either die or have serious physical damage to these lives. Another justification for whistleblowing is someone can blow the whistle because they want to avoid being complicit in wrongdoing, where they are kind of complicit either kind of directly or indirectly. It can be indirectly just merely based on the fact that they're working for the company, right? And they're aware that their company is doing something that's creating serious harm. And even though they might not be assigned to that very project for that product that leads to serious harm, they're still complicit. Their hands are still dirty, morally speaking, right? Their hands are not clean because they're aware of it, right? They're aware of this problem, even though they're not part of that project. And that means if they don't say anything, then they hold some blame, right? There is some blame on their hands. So a second kind of justification is to avoid complicity in wrongdoing. Okay, so here's some advice, general advice on whistleblowing. Generally, try to take advantage of any formal or informal process a company may have before blowing the whistle. Here, blowing the whistle, this is meant in the sense of blowing the whistle externally. So try to take advantage of blowing the whistle internally before blowing the whistle externally. So try to take advantage of any formal or informal process a company may have. This is generally speaking, this is not in every case. There can be possible exception cases, and there could be a possible exception case when we get to our last slide when we discuss a case study. And also when coming to the table and presenting an objection or a concern or worry to your supervisor or to those who are higher up in the company, if you're an engineer, what you want to do is also present positive suggestions, right? Don't only be negative and provide, objections against maybe a particular procedure or a particular product, but rather, raise those concerns, but also come up with something positive about, here we can do something else, right? That can alleviate that problem and can still lead us to maybe still being profitable or what have you, or making a just as good of a product, etc. Right? Come with something positive to the table as well. Also, determine whether it's best to involve other employees in the protest or not. Sometimes this can be useful to invite other employees into the protest who might have your same moral concerns and worries if you find yourself in this situation, if you're an engineer. And one reason why it would be helpful is, having many voices shows a kind of strong interest from a variety of engineers in this particular situation. Also, simultaneously raising the alarm, showing that this isn't coming from some kind of random voice, a single voice in the wilderness, but this is something that is acknowledged as a problem by many employees within the company, and this can create a more powerful, unified voice in trying to bring about change. Okay, so here in our last slide, let's discuss this case study. So here we have an engineer who works for an airplane building company, a company that builds airplanes. that has a formal process for whistleblowing to keep things in-house. So they have a kind of in-house system to keep things internal rather than external. And this process, it takes time. So there is, it's a bureaucratic process. The process takes time. It takes about 2 weeks to get through before any decision is made and any changes are made or any action is taken by the company. But the company is usually very good about listening and making changes in response to legitimate complaints. So the company is generally good about this, and they don't punish whistleblowers or anything like that. So the engineer, that is, they usually don't punish those who blow the whistle going through this formal process. So the engineer discovers, however, a deadly flaw with one of their new plane models that has just been widely bought by a bunch of airline companies. So this airline building company, they came out with this model, a new model, and it's been bought and widely bought by a lot of airline companies and are now starting to be used, right? They're starting to be used now. And the engineer wants to warn the airlines. The engineer wants to take it external, right, to the external level, and wants to do so immediately, and doesn't want to go through that formal 2-week process because the airplanes are going up now. They're just starting to go up in the air now. But coworkers and management try to convince her to first proceed through the formal channels and keep things internal. All right, and once again, this flaw is a serious flaw that can lead to airplanes, for example, malfunctioning in mid-flight and coming down. So what should she do in this situation and why? So think deeply about this. I'll leave this open, or we'll discuss this further if you so choose in the forum discussions. And I'm sure there'll be a good number of posts on it, and we'll get deeper into it and think about various possible reasons on both sides, think about ethical theories, etc. And I look forward to discussing this further in the posts.